Hi, good afternoon. I'm Razif. I'm the head for safety and sustainability at Sime Darby Property. I'd like to thank MSAM for inviting us to speak today. What I'm going to share with you is our aspiration as Sime Darby Property move towards a sustainable township. And we'd like to share with you the Sime Darby Property sustainability story. But before I start, I want to share with you my own experience as a Sime Darby Property staff in terms of its sustainability journey. This is mainly for those of you who are interested to pursue a STEM career: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So for every Sime Darby Property staff, the reason we wake up is what you see on the screen right now. Want to be a value multiplier for people, businesses, economies, and the planet. How I collaborate with engineers, with architects, landscape architects, our contractors, health and safety professionals, etc., etc. And all our decision making, all the systems and management that we design will always revolve around people, businesses, economies, and the planet, supported by our vision and our mission. So our long-term aspiration is what you see on the screen: 6 items. One is around climate, making sure that we play a role to ensure that we manage the climate crisis, minimize the use of energy, and also responsibly use water. Within our township, if you look at the second frame, it is about a functioning and healthy ecological system in our township. The community's well-being is also designed into our township, and also in the fourth frame, you can see mobility for you to move from one place to another. When it comes to constructing our building, we ensure that the resources are used responsibly. Within our township, we ensure that businesses thrive and promote innovation. So this is our long-term aspiration. As we know, development came at a cost. So since the 1880s, industrialization and modernization meant that the use of hydrocarbon emits what we call greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide as one of them, into the atmosphere. And this has led to what we are seeing right now, the climate crisis. The increase in emissions since 1880 mean that the temperature or the global surface temperature of the Earth kept increasing. You can see at the bottom of the graph is 1880 to the year 2000s, where we are right now. It has been gradually increasing, and towards the end, it has increased rapidly. And this is a concern. When you have increasing temperature, you will encourage drought. The Earth will evaporate all the vapor up to the clouds. And now the clouds, dah panas, right, will retain more water when it is hotter in the atmosphere. And when it rains, it will release a lot of water onto the Earth, and then you can see flooding. So increasing temperature will ironically cause more flooding, as what we have seen in the last few years. So what must we do? We must reduce our emissions to make sure that future generations can enjoy the resources that my generation enjoyed. And this reduction of emissions, we call it towards net zero, a net zero target. In my presentation today, I would like you to remember 5 things, very simple: net zero, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and offset. Just 5, yeah? And we will play along from all these 5 elements throughout my presentation. Scope 1 is about reducing your fuel, be it gas like LPG or your diesel and petrol. Scope 2 is reducing your electricity, be it the one that you use your electricity, light bulbs, air conditioning. Scope 3 is more complex. It is no longer the emissions you produce, but the emissions your contractor produce and your supplier produce. And all of these scope 1, 2, and 3, you add up, will become emissions that's released to the atmosphere. You need to reduce these emissions until net zero. If you're not able to reduce until you get to zero, then you need to offset some of your emissions. I will share with you what offset means in the next few slides. Sime Darby Property, we have developed a simple model. And this model, you can use to design your carbon emission reduction target over the longer term, and in our case, towards 2050. So I will spend a little bit more time, step by step, to understand this simple model that we have developed. It doesn't matter whether it's for your university, your school, even for your home, you can use this model. We start off with a baseline. In the illustrative example here is 2020. How much fuel, how much electricity did you use in 2020? So that becomes the baseline. And this is calculated in tonnage of carbon emitted equivalent, carbon dioxide equivalent. So you start with the baseline, and then what do you do next? If you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, you can see it's a 2050 is where you want to reach net zero. Tu jauh tu. So let's take what we call a near-term target. The near-term target is 2030. You can see that what we want to reduce is 42% from your baseline for your fuel and electricity in about 8 years' time. Next is, after you have reduced to, after you have a target of 2030 of 42% reduction, then the science-based targets say, with all the technology that they assume going to be around in the next 20 years, then you can achieve a 90% reduction. Tu belum net zero lagi, right? And how do you achieve the last 10% is offset, whether you plant trees or 3 other mechanisms that you can adopt in order for you to have that 10% offset. I will now show you, now you have a target towards 2050, I will now show you what are the things, what are some of the options you can do so that you can see the trajectory towards 2050. So that will be the blue line. For example, in the next 8 years, you do retrofitting, you invest in renewables, you invest in electrification, then you can see the blue line exceeding the 2030 target. When it comes to carbon, exceeding means it's below the orange line. So you've met the 2030 target based on those investments that you've done. I'll cover the investments in a little bit. Then what the science-based models say, there'll be enough efficient technology that will be available. You adopt that into your house, university, school, or companies, operation, and you will reach 90%. The remaining 10% or the 10% offset, you can do carbon removal. There are mechanical carbon removal called carbon capture and storage, or which costs a lot of money, or you plant a lot of trees now for it to play a role in the future. And I'll cover a little bit of everything in the next few slides. Let's go deeper into Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emission. So these are examples of Scope 1 and 2 examples, right? So there are a lot more examples. I'll cover a few. One is retrofitting. You can remember the blue line of the earlier graph. You can change whenever you want to change your air conditioning, upgrade to the 5-star air condition, upgrade to the 5-star refrigerator, stop using the old type of lights and change them to LED lighting. Electrification is using EV vehicle for your fleet rather than petrol or diesel vehicle. And for us, we have golf clubs and we have convention center. Why don't we electrify the stoves that we use? Because it uses a lot of LPG gas. Renewable energy is something that you can do as well on the rooftop. This is for your own operations. For our contractors, for our suppliers, we need to work with them also for them to reduce their emissions. For example, if you know inside concrete, you can always see the reinforcement bars, which are made of steel. Why don't some part of our development we use an alternative to steel, which you can see here, which is glass woven reinforcement bar. The one at the bottom is a lower carbon cement, not zero carbon, a lower carbon cement, which we use in many of our projects as well. The inverted triangle that you see is about reducing waste to landfill. You can make policies to it. An example like ours, you are not allowed to use single-use water plastic bottle. You are only allowed to use refillable water bottles. That's only one example. There's plenty of other examples. Our biggest waste come from construction sites, and we are working with the contractors on two fronts. One is, can we design out waste via standardization of our design or linear structures of our homes and factories? Or on the site itself, can they use certain materials that will reduce waste on site? Remember, there are 5 things that I will share with you: net zero, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. I've already covered them. Now is that offset piece. A company can opt to, if they have land, to do solar farm. It can range from hundreds acres to thousands of acres for you to install solar farm. And that can offset your emissions, and then the solar farm can be used and offset your emissions. Second part is about conservation. If you have forests, you leave the forest as it is and conserve those forests, and they become very good carbon sink. This is also another offset. The other piece that we are spending a lot of resources and time and brain power is around regenerating urban biodiversity. So you have our townships, as you can see on the left and right of that river. Can we regenerate a corridor, an urban biodiversity corridor along our township? I'll cover that exciting piece in a while. So now you can see that without nature, there will be no net zero. You cannot achieve net zero if you do not invest in nature. A lot of articles have been covering this in the last year or so. These are the 5 threats to biodiversity, as you can see on the screen. And if you do not manage this, then you will have flooding, drought, as I covered earlier. This is Sime Darby Property commitment to urban biodiversity. 2 things. One is conservation of urban biodiversity. Second is regenerating urban biodiversity. And when you talk about biodiversity, all these efforts, it is more than just tree planting. It requires us to build expertise, capabilities, working with so many people to increase our expertise in science, technology, and engineering. But before I go in more detail on what nature and biodiversity is, we need to understand what biodiversity is by definition. The key word to biodiversity is variety. So variety of plants, animals, and inside the tanah, it's all about bacteria and fungi. I think that's how you pronounce it. There are 2 approaches that we do. One is conservation. For example, there's a 53 acres at KL East. This is KL, that we have set aside purely for conservation. The second approach, other than conservation, is regenerating urban biodiversity. And this is how do you ensure that flora and fauna within an urban setting can still get resources, can still get food, water from our urban setting. Let me go back to conservation. You can see a few of the numbers on plant species and bird species that we have taken inventory of, fish, reptiles, and insects, etc. And working with Forest Research Institute of Malaysia, or what many people call FRIM, for our electricity and fuel emissions, we can use the forest to absorb the carbon dioxide and therefore reach net zero for Scope 1 and Scope 2. For regenerating urban biodiversity, we are going to construct a 2.1 kilometer of an urban biodiversity corridor so that animals can use the corridor that mimics forest layers for resources. These are actual images taken from our city of Elmina in Shah Alam. You can see some of them are endangered and one is vulnerable. It is critical that we invest our resources to make sure that they have refuge and resources. We cannot do this alone. We engage government, schools, universities, authorities, and also even our peers and competitors in order for us to engage them on the importance of conservation and regeneration. But for us to move towards our aspiration of sustainable township, it is more than just flora and fauna. It is about the philosophy under the UNSDG, United Nations Sustainability Development Goals of leaving no one behind. There are two key things that Sime Darby Property has embarked on. One is on TVET, Technical and Vocational Education and Training, on two key fields, which is leisure and hospitality, and of course, construction. We sponsor B40 youth courses in IKBN, Institute Kemahiran Belia Negara, and also CIDB under Academy Bina Malaysia, where once they graduate, they can either work in our golf clubs and convention center or in our construction sites. Of course, they are free to say, I do not want to work with you and I want to work with somebody else, but hopefully the graduates will work with us. The intent of us doing the TVET sponsorship or support is to take out B40 families from the cycle or from their poverty cycle. And this is a long-term effort that I look forward to us to help as many B40 youth as possible. And we cannot forget that we have so many construction projects, so many foreign migrant workers, and two things that we ensure that we put our efforts in. One is ensuring the well-being of the workers. They come from far away to work for us. And you can see there, Senior Manager Nick Faiza interacting with the workers on site. Second, it's about their health and safety. We have a whole department that manages health and safety provided and supported by 20 other health and safety professionals employed by the company. There's a lot of things that we are doing in the sustainability space. And I keep iterating to the organization, we must not forget, why do we do this? And this is the reason. We do this to make sure that the girl in the photograph has or will enjoy the same resources that my generation is enjoying. And I think it is worth every effort of the resources that we have put in to make sure that happens. And with that, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much.